Welcome to this explainer. Okay, so as India celebrates 79 years of independence with the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, we always hear about the founding fathers, right? But today, we're doing something a little different. We're going to dive into the true, often completely overlooked stories of India's female freedom fighters, bringing their bravery, strategy, and sheer determination right to the forefront.
Okay, let's dive into this. Who really won India's freedom? I mean, your mind probably jumps straight to a few very famous names, mostly men in homespun cloth or sharp suits. That's the traditional historical narrative, right? But think about it. Was the fight for a nation's soul really won by just half its population? No way. Today, we're challenging that narrative. We're looking at the women who weren't just supporting from the sidelines, but who were literally the architects and frontline soldiers of this massive movement. And just to show you exactly how early this female-led resistance actually began, think about the year 1817. We're not talking about the 1940s here. This was decades before the mainstream independence movement even got off the ground. We have Bhikaji Holkar actively fighting British forces. She took on British Colonel Malcolm and actually defeated him using some seriously brilliant guerrilla warfare tactics. It completely shifts our timeline of when women started taking up arms for their country, doesn't it?
So here's how we're breaking it down today. First, the unsung freedom fighters. Then, queens who fought back. Third, leaders of the movement. Fourth, rebels, radio and reform. And finally, the first women of free India.
Section 1. The Unsung Freedom Fighters, Beyond the Shadows. As we look back on 79 years of independence, it is absolutely crucial to recognize that the story of India's freedom is just fundamentally incomplete without understanding the immense sacrifices made by these women.
Because this was the visceral, gritty reality of their resistance. These women weren't just quietly passing out pamphlets in safe rooms. They were deeply brave individuals out there dominating street protests, leading massive public marches, and delivering these fiercely passionate speeches. And they paid a heavy price for it, too. They faced severe torture, immense hardship, and absolutely brutal, unfair treatment. They were active, frontline resistors who literally refused to back down.
Moving into Section 2, Queens who fought back, swords and strategy. Long before the era of nonviolent civil disobedience, the resistance was raw, it was armed, and it was led by female royalty.
Now, what's really interesting here is how we can trace the chronological evolution of early armed female resistance straight across the 19th century. We already talked about Bhikaji Holkar in 1817, but jump forward to 1824. That's nearly 30 years before the famous 1857 rebellion. Rani of Kittur, who had been training in sword fighting and archery since she was a little girl, fearlessly went to war against the British East India Company. For 12 whole days, she and her soldiers fiercely defended their fort. Then, moving to 1857, the Great Rebellion, we see leaders like Begum Hazrat Mahal in Lucknow giving incredible, stiff-armed resistance to the British forces.
And of course, the 1857 rebellion brings us to probably the most iconic warrior queen of this era, Rani Lakshmibai of Jhansi. When the British tried to annex her kingdom using the doctrine of lapse, she absolutely flat-out refused to surrender. She attired herself as a man and rode directly into the battlefield. She gave the ultimate sacrifice, dying while fighting the British forces, and her sheer courage became this monumental inspiration for millions of Indians who would rise against alien rule in the decades to come.
Section 3. Leaders of the movement, mobilizing the masses. So, as we cross into the 20th century, the whole nature of the warfare shifted. The physical swords of the queens were replaced by brilliant intellectual and political strategies. We start seeing two very different but equally vital arenas of the struggle. In terms of international diplomatic strategy, you've got Madame Bhikaji Cama spreading revolutionary thought abroad. She famously unfurled the first national flag at a conference in Germany all the way back in 1907. She was essentially Mother India's first cultural representative to the West. Meanwhile, back home in the intense world of grassroots organizing, Kasturba Gandhi was a massive pillar of the movement, taking part in the Quit India movement and tragically dying while imprisoned. Beside her is Kamala Nehru, who prominently organized this massive no-tax campaign in the United Provinces. So you've got international pressure on one side and hardcore domestic mobilization on the other. And they weren't just participating, they were actually taking charge of the biggest political organizations of the time. Annie Besant, a fierce champion of women's rights, founded the Home Rule League in 1916 and became the very first woman president of the Indian National Congress in 1917. Then we have Sarojini Naidu, the Nightingale of India. She became the first Indian woman president of the Congress in 1925. And get this, when Mahatma Gandhi was arrested in 1930, it was Sarojini Naidu who stepped up and took the absolute helm of the entire movement. Women were systematically leading the political vanguard.
All right, Section 4, Rebels, Radio, and Reform, the Underground War. Because politics wasn't just played in grand halls. By the 1930s and 40s, we are looking at a high-stakes, highly visceral, underground resistance.
Usha Mehta's story is literally like something out of a spy thriller. Imagine being just 8 years old and actively participating in your first protest against the British. That lifelong dedication eventually led her to organize the famous Secret Congress Radio. She was broadcasting messages from the shadows, keeping the whole spirit of the Quit India movement alive, while the British were desperately trying to hunt down her radio signal. Just incredible. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer physical courage these women possessed. Listen to this account of Samati Kamaladevi Chattopadhyaya from January 1930. During a scuffle, she completely captured the imagination of the entire nation by clinging to the Indian tricolor to protect it. Blows were raining down on her, yet she stood like a rock, bleeding profusely, just completely refusing to let that flag fall. It is a staggering image of sacrifice.
We see that exact same dramatic courage in Aruna Asaf Ali. In 1942, she seized the moment and publicly unfurled the national flag at the Gawalia Tank Maidan in Bombay, a daring act that essentially kicked off the entire Quit India movement. She became an instant legend for thousands of youths overnight. But she didn't stop there. She immediately went underground to evade arrest, continuing her work as a full-time activist and editing the underground monthly journal in Clop.
Then we have a really fascinating figure who took the fight to a literal military level, Captain Lakshmi Sahgal. She had actually completed her studies in medicine, but her role was completely unique. She combined her medical expertise with armed leadership, becoming an officer in the Indian National Army. She even served as the Women's Affairs Minister in the Azad Hind government. So from secret radios to underground journals to commanding actual troops, these women were fighting on every conceivable front.
Which brings us to Section 5, First Women of Free India, Governing the New Nation. Because once freedom was won, these fighters didn't just quietly fade into the background. They immediately stepped up to govern the newly freed nation.
I really want to hammer home the power of these firsts. Their leadership flawlessly transitioned from rebellion straight to top-tier domestic and global governance. Look at Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, imprisoned 3 times during the freedom struggle, and then she goes on to become the very first woman president of the United Nations General Assembly, challenging British might on the world stage. Then you have Sarojini Naidu, who spent 21 months in jail, becoming the first woman governor of an Indian state. And Sucheta Kriplani, a staunch nationalist who famously sang Vande Mataram in the Constituent Assembly on the Day of Independence, she becomes India's first woman chief minister. They literally built the government of the nation they fought so hard to free. So the crucial point here is that none of this political, military, or social achievement happens in a vacuum. I have to bring up Savitribai Phule right here. While she operated a bit earlier, founding the first modern Indian girls' school in Pune and becoming India's first female teacher, she really laid the bedrock. The political and physical freedom won by all the women we've discussed today was fundamentally built on the foundation of education and women's rights that pioneers like Savitribai Phule fought so hard to establish. And that brings us to the end of our explainer. From guerrilla warfare in 1817 all the way to governing a free republic, these 15 women shaped the destiny of millions. Yet for so long, they remained this unsung vanguard. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If these 15 incredible women could literally build a nation from the shadows, whose history are we still missing today? Keep digging, keep learning, and thank you so much for joining me to uncover these truly fascinating truths.